Welcome back. I'm your host, Leslie Cottle, and you are listening to This Empowered Life podcast, the podcast made to support you on your self-transformation journey, helping you live your life's purpose and align with your destiny and highest timeline. I'm so excited for this episode today, guys. It is all about how the world is your mirror. Now, buckle up, wait till the end. There's going to be this amazing transmission on assumptions, so dig in. All right. Hello. Oh my gosh. Guys, today the episode is all about how the world is your mirror. How the world is your mirror. It's said that everything in this world is neutral until the witness gives it meaning. And the witness in this episode, of course, is you. Now, this is kind of a hard lesson sometimes to really hone in on, but it's how you feel about yourself is constantly being mirrored back to you. So how you feel about yourself is constantly being mirrored back to you in situations and the things that you invite into your life and the things that you accept into your life. Everything is just a mirror for our own self-worth. Now, it's hard to believe this, but the more I go down my transformation journey, the more I recognize this to be true. And we know this, that we're changing all the time, that our self-worth is changing all the time, because someone might say one sentence to you today, and then a week later, they say the same sentence, and sometimes it just doesn't land the same. And this isn't because they're saying it any different or because they necessarily have a meaning behind it that's different. It's because you, the receiver, the witness, is perceiving it differently. So everything in our life is really just a mirror for what it is that, or how it is that we feel about ourselves. And everyone has a lens on life, right? The way that you look at the world is different than the way that I look at the world. And the way that your best friend looks at the world, the way that your partner looks at the world, the way that your child looks at the world. Everything is made up of our past experiences, of things that we've recently consumed, of how we want to see the world, of our wounds, of our love. And something like this is what makes humans just literally so interesting, and also a little bit terrifying at the same time. And an example of this that I want to bring up right now is this game that I play with one of my nephews, or I've played before with him, and it's called I Picture an Apple. And so we imagine an apple, and the first lesson of it is that if I ask you to imagine an apple, tell me what color that is. Now, you might be thinking of a light green apple, a dark red apple. You might think of a gala apple right now. Everyone's going to be imagining a different colored apple. And then the next question I'm going to ask you while you have that apple in your mind's eye is imagine what's around the apple. Imagine what's around it. Now, as you're doing this exercise, you know that there are infinite locations for this apple. And this becomes a really, really fun game with my nephew, where he'll imagine an apple with a worm in it, or imagine an apple on top of a tree, or maybe I imagine a rotten apple under his shoe. There's so many different ways that we can imagine things in different locations for the apple. But this example begins to show you how we relate to others through our own lens, through our own perspective, that we're always bringing into a situation and an environment our past. Everything has a lens. And what you believe, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, again, is just being mirrored back to you. It's always this reflection every moment of every day. Now we can put into practice the reflection that we want to be seeing. We can put into practice the reflection that, or just noticing that, like, what is the reflection telling us back about ourselves? And a lot of this has to do with assumptions. Now, assumptions are things that we're just bringing into a conversation. I'm saying an apple, you're picturing a blue apple, not a blue apple, maybe you're picturing a blue apple, but I say apple and you're picturing a green apple or a red apple. You're assuming that apple is a specific color. And when we think about assumptions, I want you to think about maybe the last conversation that you had recently. And think about what happened in that conversation, how were you perceiving it, and I want you to think about if there was another way to imagine how that person might have been acting or what they might have been trying to portray to you that is different than the way that you perceived it. Like if someone says that they're tired, that work was tough today, that they're in a bad mood, that means something different to different people. And on one hand, we know what that feeling feels like for us, but do you know what that feeling feels like for somebody else? And one of the things that you can do in those situations is ask a clarifying question. It's one of my favorite things to do, especially recently, because I'm recognizing that my lens is everywhere. And as much as I try to pull back in a conversation and not bring everything that I know into a conversation, my lens ends up diluting what someone else is trying to tell me. And so lately I've been asking really detailed questions, like if someone's tired, like, do I need to ask about their sleep? Or should I just ask why? Or what's up? Do you care to explore more on that? I'd love to hear more. And a clarifying question on someone who's in a bad mood. You know, a bad mood can mean so many different things. I just love asking a clarifying question. What's that like for you? Tell me more. Another example of this is when you're anticipating and assuming that something in your life is going to go a certain way. And the lens that you bring into that is often the lens of the past, maybe a lens of limitation. And so, for example, if you were looking for a new job, if you assumed it was going to be a hard process, how would you look forward to that situation? Or if you were looking for a new job and you assumed that it was going to be really long, how would you approach that process? But the way that we get to flip this, knowing that we have a lens when we walk into every situation, is to ask yourself, what if that outcome, what if I assumed that the outcome was something that I desired? How would I act if I was looking for a new job and I knew that there were just going to be so many opportunities and so many offers? How would I act then? Would I be excited? Would I be looking forward to the process a little bit more? I mean, that lens is up to you. But I just love the question that we get to ask ourselves of how would I act if I had known, thought, or assumed differently? How would I act if I had known, thought, or assumed that my desires were going to happen? How would I act if I had known, thought, and assumed that everything that I wanted was going to happen? It's so powerful to think about that because it really ends up being, when you switch the lens, you end up embodying an entirely different character. You no longer are looping the past. You no longer are creating scenarios that you've already been in before. You're able to actually step away from the past, step away from that lens, step away from the mirror that you already know what's going to happen, and you're able to start creating something new. Just with a thought. It all starts with the thought of assumption. And I want to point out this too, because I think it's really important for us to recognize a little bit deeper on the mirror and how is like the world our mirror. So everything is always in this assumption. But what happens is when there's a stimulus, so a thought, you see something, an image, there's always a feeling. And the feeling becomes a thought. The thought becomes a story. The story becomes an action that you play out, and that action is what creates reality. So if you're able to assume something different, if you're able to have the feeling and have that thought and have that story, but change the story, change the thought, you're able to actually shift what the mirror is going to be reflecting back to you. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Sending you so much love, so much light. Tune in Tuesdays for more yummy and soulful episodes. If you love what you're hearing and want to support the podcast, please follow and rate the podcast on Spotify and Apple to help new listeners find us. To find out more about my coaching and healing practice, head over to my website, www.lesliecottle.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.